so when they're doing those activities that push back on that oblique axis, they're involving a little bit too much of this area here, and that reinforces that twist to the left rather than correcting it. Hey guys, Greg Chaplin here, physical therapist and strength and conditioning specialist. And in this video, we're going to talk about what to do when your pelvis is twisted to the left. We're going to show you how this occurs in the first place, and then we're going to go through a couple of common exercises and highlight one very common mistake that people make when trying to correct this issue. We'll show you how not to make that mistake and how to perform these activities correctly instead. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. So many of you that will have watched my channel or other channels that are similar might have heard that the pelvis tends to be oriented to the right, but when you look at your own pelvis, you think, that really looks like it's twisted more to the left. And you're actually right, but there's just a small point of confusion here that needs to be clarified. So let's bring out Lucy here and let's talk about what orientation of the pelvis actually means. So orientation is just a movement in space in a particular direction. So if we think about orienting to the right, we can do this on a number of axes. So we can go to the right kind of like this turning action where we're moving everything to the right and turning so the pelvis is facing the right, or we could go laterally like this where we're still pushing over towards the right, but you'll see the pelvis tends to actually look more straight ahead. Now another way that we can do this is on an oblique axis. This is something that Bill Hartman's talked about at length, where we actually get the other side, which in most cases is going to be the left, coming up and over, but the pelvis is orienting towards its position on the right. And so what you'll notice here is that if I push towards the right side on this oblique axis with the left side coming up, you can actually get the pelvis to start looking like it's twisted to the left. Now, if as we're orienting to the right, we also orient forward in space, you're going to see this exaggerated even a little bit more. So we come up, orienting to the right, and then forward. And what you're going to see here is now the pelvis is very much looking towards the left. So even though we're oriented towards the right, we're turned towards the left. Okay, so we saw how this left twisted pelvis emerged on Lucy, but sometimes it's easier to see on a full scale model. So I've got my buddy Mr. Phibbs here. And so just to walk you through this sequence of events, we're orienting towards the right with the pelvis, which means the pelvis is shifting over in space towards the right side. Usually this is going to happen with the left twisted pelvis by the left side coming up and over on an oblique axis. That's the first step. Then once we're oriented up and over on the oblique axis, the right side tends to come forward a little bit more. This is what really reinforces that look of being twisted to the left. Let's look at that from the back. So the first step was we oriented to the right by coming up and over on the left, and then the right side pushed forward even a little bit more. And so what that does is it really gums up this whole area between the lower rib cage and the pelvis on the right side. So if we want to blame muscles, we can think of erector spinae, we can think of quadratus lumborum, or even latissimus dorsi. So the sequence of events being up and over on the oblique and then more forward on the right means that to fix this, we need to first go back on the right and then back into the left on the oblique. Now the biggest issue I see here is that people make the mistake of not going back on the right side first before pushing back into the left. And so when they're doing those activities that push back on that oblique axis, they're involving a little bit too much of this area here, and that reinforces that twist to the left rather than correcting it. Now we're going to walk through two very common exercises that can help to alleviate this issue, but we're going to make a point of emphasizing that we want to keep this space between the lower rib cage on the right and the pelvis open throughout. So I'm going to show you not only how to do these activities, but we're going to go through some considerations on how to sequence these so that you can get the most optimal results. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Okay, so we're going to show you this activity, and I know you're looking at my back here, but I want to illustrate that this is the area that we want to stay open. So if we think about our alignment just front to back through this area between the lower rib cage and the pelvis, we can either be in an arch where we're pushed forward on that side, or if we shift that side back, this side of the back is going to come into a little bit more of a rounded position, and the pelvis will tend to tip back on that side as well. Now we want to maintain this in that open position as we go through this activity. So with this one, if you're familiar, we're going to shift that knee forward over the foot. We're going to get weight into the heel that's on the wall here. And we're going to keep this upper leg either parallel with the ground or even slightly lifted above the line of parallel. Now in this position, we can reach forward with the right arm, take a nice easy breath in. We're going to expand this space in the lower rib cage on the right side. And then we'll exhale and push into the wall through the heel of the right leg, We should feel a little bit of activation here in the hip, which is emphasizing that pull of the sit bone down towards the heel, which is helping to keep this space here open. Now, just so you can see this from another view, we're going to get straight so that the head, rib cage, and pelvis are all lined up. Get that right foot on the wall, left leg's relatively straight in line with the body. We're going to make sure we shift this right side back in space just a little bit so that we're nice and open from the lower rib cage all the way to the pelvis. Then we're going to have that foot on the wall with the majority of the pressure in the heel. Our first step is pull that knee forward over the foot while keeping this nice and open. From here, we're going to take a breath in through the nose, reaching forward with that right arm, then an exhale and pushing into the wall through the heel of the right leg. You should feel that lower aspect of the pelvis engage a little bit to help us pull that pelvis into that shifted back position that we were talking about before. And then we just repeat that. A little inhale and reach, a little exhale and push. So another activity that you'll see is used quite a bit for this type issue is something that's a staggered deadlift variation. So ultimately, the right foot forward and left foot back position is what is going to allow us to go back on that oblique axis. So a right hand hold with a left foot back and a right foot forward is often the most common goal to get to with this activity. However, if we have this right side here that's a little bit gummed up because we're pushed way forward on the right, we need to be careful here. And a really simple way to work with this is to work with a right foot back stance first. And so we could hold this on the right or the left. The reasons for that are going to be a little bit different depending on the situation, but let's just hold this on the same side here, which is going to help us open up this area while having the right foot back. So we're going to not only open up this area, but also the back of the pelvis a little bit, which is going to reduce that forward orientation. And then we're going to get back to just that regular rightward orientation before going back into the left. So we've got this right foot back. We're going to get heavy into the heel, and we're going to think about allowing the body to sit back so it's stacked over that heel. So going back to that video that we just made about orientation in space being what determines the movement of the pelvis and the rib cage, we're going to apply that same concept here. So now we get into this position. We could even hold the dumbbell so that it's open like this or closed down. It's not going to matter quite as much, but we're going to think about as we shift back, not only shifting the pelvis back, but also shifting that lower aspect of the rib cage back so that this whole area here is in a nice open position. So we're going to go back. We can get into this position. Make sure this is nice and open. We're going to feel that going back in space. Then we're going to take an easy breath in that position, trying to feel that lower rib cage expand. Then a little exhale, and we're going to think about pulling the sit bone down towards the heel and then coming straight up by engaging the muscles on the back of the pelvis. Little easy breath in. Exhale gently to go back. Make sure this area is nice and open. We're going to take our breath in here. And exhale, pulling the sit bone down towards the pelvis. Okay, so now that we've got that right side coming back in space a little bit, we've got that space between the lower rib cage and the pelvis a little bit more open. Now we can bring the left foot behind the right foot and go to that variation that we were talking about earlier. Now with this, a major point of emphasis here is going to be to move back and let the weight in the right hand and the stance itself do the work to reorient the pelvis for you. You don't need to think about going back so aggressively on this axis, although a little bit of a push from the right foot back into the left can help. But you don't want to sacrifice this area here being open to achieve that shift back into the left. So just let the stance do the work, and then if you need to get a little bit of extra push, that can come later. So you're going to hold the weight in the right hand. You're going to let it come just to the inside of the knee, but you're going to think about shifting straight back, maintaining that right side open as well. Shifting back. Little breath in. Exhale again, thinking about pulling down with the sit bone towards the heel. It's going to allow that left side of the pelvis to come down. It's going to help reduce that oblique axis orientation. Inhale at the top. Exhale down. Inhale at the bottom. Exhale, sit bone coming down towards the heel. Okay, so just to recap, guys, we had that pelvis that's oriented towards the right, but twisted towards the left. So our first step is to come back on the right, make sure that that right side of the back is nice and open and we can shift our center of mass back on that side. We want to do this first before we push back into the left. If we can do those steps in that order, we're going to restore the movement options that we're lacking in the first place, and you're probably going to be moving a whole lot better. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, make sure that you like it. If you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you'll know when I upload a new video. And until next time, we'll see ya. And if you enjoyed today's video, maybe check this one out.